I'm Gabrielle Prendergast, and I'm a YA author, and that's my novel Audacious, and that's part of a series. There's a second book called Capricious. And to my left is my sister, Tess Prendergast, who is a children's librarian and PhD candidate specializing in children with special needs. And this is the Nikki Grimes, verse novelist, prose novelist, poet extraordinaire. To my right is Lesléa, right? Lesléa Newman, a poet and author of some fame and repute. Lesléa is the author of Heather Has Two Mommies, which I'm sure you've all heard of. We're all very excited to have her here with us today in this special city and special time. And next to Lesléa is Carrie-Anne Holt. She is a verse novelist of middle grade novels. And at the end is a fellow Canadian, Holly Bodger, who is a debut novelist, YA novelist, and her verse novel is in verse and prose. So I'll start by inviting Tess to speak a little bit about the term reluctant and why we are standing here to challenge that.
Probably not a hard sell to talk to you guys about novels, and I bet you all love novels. Gabrielle and I talk a lot about diversity and inclusion and making the work that we both do reach as many people as possible. One of the things that we talked about was something we've labeled the capital N novel. That's a novel of high prestige, sometimes in the canon, sometimes with lots and lots of stickers on them, the sorts of things that are hard to read. Classic sometimes would fill that. Think of Little Women, for instance, even Secret Garden. So the capital N novel is one that we value a lot, and that's fine. But also the kids who flock to those novels and read them easily are also the kids who read the best, have the least barriers to reading, were likely raised in homes where those books were read by their parents as well. And we've also, ironically labeled those readers, because we want to get to reluctant reader in a second, we've labeled those readers Uber child. So Uber is German for over. These are the kids that, as librarians, we love serving them. They gobble up everything we give them. They'll happily read a verse novel, of course, but they'll read everything proficiently and well. So now let's get to the reluctant reader label. So really, I'd like to have all of us as practitioners think about the reasons why we label them reluctant. And I'd like to have everyone consider the reason we call them reluctant. We really don't have another word for it, because we can't understand why they don't like reading. Of course there's reasons for, but none of those reasons actually justify labeling kids who may struggle or may not read well, or may not read voraciously, or may not read enthusiastically. And that we'd prefer to think of them as kids who just haven't yet met the book that's going to make them a happy reader. And the reason I want to interrupt using reluctant is because it puts the blame on the kid, when actually I think as adults, parents, librarians, teachers, everyone who we're in this literacy society, it's a social act, and that kids are going to become the readers that they are going to become because of the social interactions they have around books. And I can almost guarantee that every kid you've ever met who is a quote-unquote reluctant reader has had a really negative experience with attempting a literacy act where they got shamed, bullied, or something. So let's stop doing that. Let's think about diverse readers and diverse forms, and that can certainly include the canon of the books that we all love, But let's go beyond that, and let's think about how we can get lots of kids reading lots of different things. And why not, today's the perfect day to consider the verse novel as perhaps one of those, and we're going to celebrate that today, but let's consider the verse novel as a possible avenue for a kid who, for any other reason, may not want to read the capital N novel.
I just wanted to introduce just a few ways in which, and you've all been given a handout, and these are just some ideas that we have about how verse novels differ from capital N novels, and how those differences might be relevant and helpful to readers who are currently underserved in terms of the types of novels that they have been exposed to. So it's really just talking about how poetry works. I've just defined it as mechanically, logistically, and thematically. So mechanically, we're looking at how poetry looks on the page, and some other aspects of poetry that might be of assistance to a reader who's struggling for some reason. So that would be rhyme, meter, alliteration, anything that is assisting them in predicting what the next word is going to be, for example, rhyme, in remembering things, using alliteration, using acrostic poems, for example. But one thing that I don't want to neglect is the appearance of verse on the page. There hasn't been a lot of research into this. One of the reasons I'm doing this panel is because I hope that people will do a little bit of research into verse novels and their use with young readers. But one of the theories about part of the cause of dyslexia is that it involves a dysfunctional scanning. And so when dyslexic readers read, they're scanning forward in the sentence, but the next part of the sentence is interfering with their comprehension of what they're actually reading at that moment. And when you look at verse on the page, you will notice that there is white space on either side of the chunk that's being read. And that seems to make a difference in the ability of someone with a reading dysfunction like dyslexia. So those are some aspects of poetry, mechanical aspects of poetry, that may appeal to readers who are struggling for some reason. Logistically, the simple fact that verse novels are short. Kids these days are very, very busy. They have a ton of homework, they're in dance, they're in soccer, and verse novels tend to be about half the length of a prose novel, but they still contain all the details, all the characters, all the plot, all the conflict, all the themes, all the issues. They're all packed in there. My book is packed full of issues. People have said there's too many issues in this book. So that's a good choice for a child who doesn't have a lot of time, a reader who doesn't have a lot of time, or a reader who reads really slowly for some reason, maybe because of one of these dysfunctions. And we've all had feedback from readers who say, oh, I read this book in an hour, I read this book in 2 hours. And that pleases them, because then they feel like their friends who are, as Tess says, the Uber readers, who can plow through Harry Potter in an afternoon. And the third thing is thematically. And verse, I think, is particularly suited for themes that are disturbing, heavy, edgy, or unfamiliar. And all the verse novelists sitting here are writing about those types of themes. And we'll give you some, hopefully if we have time, we can get through everyone, some examples of how that works. And it's just presented in a lighter way, again with a lot of white space on the page. So rather than reading 3 dense pages of prose about illness or death or an unfamiliar culture where there's a lot of detail, you're reading a piece of verse which is expressing that in a more expressionistic way, and therefore allowing the reader's mind to kind of fill in at the speed that they are capable of, that's suitable for them. So those are the 3 areas, and I thought I would just invite everyone to speak alphabetically. So this is gonna test my alphabet, but I think we're starting with Holly Bodger.
I want to start by saying I have two kids. I have an Uber reader and I have a I hate reader, or I did, who had a learning disability, and I've had to deal with this in my own house, like how to get both kids doing it. It really is a challenge to try to serve both groups and to find what it is that makes that kid want to read. I do now have two Uber readers, but it was really, really hard to get my son, in this case, in any way interested in reading. I had to just find what it is that made him do this. And now he's ecstatic, but he did start off with a learning disability. You know, he was afraid to read. He was embarrassed to not be his sister or to be the other kids. Anyway, so the three things I wanted to talk about that I think are great tips for people trying to get the readers involved that aren't the Uber readers. The first one I'm going to say is to get them young. My novel's recommended 12 and up, but I gave it to my daughter when she was 9, and she read it. And she gave it to her friends and they all read it. And I noticed I got a lot more fans at a young age, and when I talked to them I realized it was because they hadn't been made scared of verse yet. And I used to call it like the Shakespeare fear that you get when you go to grade 9. Is she didn't question the format. She hadn't got to the point yet where she was afraid of the format. And a lot of people look at the format and kind of just go, ooh, poetry, I don't want to do that. But I found when I get the really young readers involved, they haven't developed that fear yet. So if you can get them at a young age, they seem to realize, oh, I love these, and these are not difficult, and then they'll stay up with it. The next thing I would say is a great tip is to read either out loud to them from part of the verse, or to give them a verse in audiobook. Now those are not extremely popular, but I have recommended them to people who, for example, love Ellen Hopkins but are afraid of verse, and when they listen to it they realize, oh, I love Ellen Hopkins. And then they want to read all of Ellen Hopkins. I'm going to just read an example from 2 parts of my book, just to show the difference, because I think to your ear it really isn't as different as it seems on the page to the reader. So the beginning of my book, I'll just read, this is verse, you can't see it. 1 month from today, I'll wake to a team of makeup artists, hairstylists buzzing outside my door. At Nanny's command, they'll swarm. They'll poke me with their glittery swords, paint me with their honey. I'll fight the urge to scratch it away because I'm pseudosity obedient, and I must keep my fingers glued together like the dolls Asha and I left buried under my bed. And then from the prose, Appa didn't try to stop the guards when they came for me yesterday. He didn't kick up a fuss like some of the parents do, crying and begging for more time. He didn't offer a bribe when the guards would have slipped into their pockets before they proceeded to drag me to the cart like nothing had happened. That's all I'm going to read. My point was, I think when you read it to the kids like that, I mean, there is a lot more to verse, but when they hear it, they realize, this kind of sounds the same to me. I understand it. It's not this difficult Shakespeare written in this weird Anglo tone that I don't understand and I need a dictionary for. So I think that sometimes helps if you can just read a little bit to them and catch them with that. The last thing I think Gabrielle already touched on is length. I know it's that time of year where there's a lot of schools have told kids you've got to read 1 book this summer, and I know of some specific teens who actually pick by word count. They look and they're like, okay, what's the shortest thing you can get me? My particular book is 32,000 words. As Gabrielle said, the average YA prose novel is about 65. I think it depends, but sci-fi is higher. But your contemporaries range around 60, 65. So for those readers, if they really want short word count because they're just trying to meet that requirement of I need to read a book this summer, then a verse novel is a great thing to say, like, ooh, 32,000, like, you don't have to read 70,000. And that's a great way to get them interested.
Nikki Grimes is the next person we'll call on.